If you ask someone almost anywhere on Earth about their favorite sport, billions of people picture this same game, unified under a single name: football. But if an American steps into a pub in London, or a bar in Madrid, or a cafe in Buenos Aires, and calls that exact same sport soccer, they are almost guaranteed to face immediate ridicule. The assumption is always the same: Americans are butchering the language just to be different. Here is the strange historical truth behind that argument. The Americans didn't invent the word soccer. The exact people who mock the term today are the ones who created it in the first place. This map shows the isolated pockets of the English-speaking world, primarily the United States, Canada, and Australia, that still cling to the word soccer against a vast, globally unified sea of football. To figure out how this massive linguistic divide actually happened, we have to completely ignore American history. Instead, we need to travel back to the muddy, chaotic fields of medieval England. For centuries, the British game of football had almost no rules. It was a massive, violent, town-wide brawl where hundreds of people would punch, tackle, and kick a ball, and each other, trying to reach a goal. This timeline shows the evolution of the sport, leading up to a critical meeting in 1863. British leaders finally gathered to standardize the rules, but they couldn't agree on how the game should be played. That disagreement split the sport in two. One group preferred carrying the ball with their hands, creating the path officially titled rugby football. The other group insisted the game should be played entirely with the feet, forming what became known as association football. These new rules were highly popular among the British upper class, especially students at elite public schools. These students had a very specific linguistic quirk. They loved giving things nicknames by adding an ER to the end of words. A 5-pound note became a fiver. A 10-pound note became a tenner. They applied this exact same formula to their newly standardized game. They took the word association. They dropped the front and back, isolated the SOC, tacked on their favorite ER ending, and created the word soccer. The term was never an American mispronunciation. It was born strictly as a posh status symbol for British high society to differentiate their preferred game from rugby. While this linguistic math was happening in London, a completely different sequence of events was playing out across the Atlantic in the late 19th century. When early collegiate sports were taking shape in the United States, students largely ignored association football. They much preferred the heavy physical contact of the other branch, rugby football. Over a few decades, American universities heavily tweaked the rules of that rugby variant. They added the line of scrimmage, introduced the forward pass, and steadily engineered a distinctly homegrown game. Since it evolved directly from rugby football, the Americans naturally claimed the simplest naming convention for their new national pastime. They called it American football, which was quickly shortened to just football. By the time the British game of association football finally started gaining traction in the States, there was a strict logistical problem. The name football was entirely monopolized by the gridiron sport. If they wanted anyone to know what game they were talking about, they needed a different name. To solve the collision, Americans simply looked at the menu of available, British-approved terms and picked up the elite nickname. They started calling the imported game soccer, and for the entire first half of the 20th century, nobody in the UK cared. The British public happily and regularly used the words soccer and football interchangeably in their own newspapers and broadcasts. This chart tracks the word soccer in British publications. Notice the sharp divergence in the 1980s. As the sport surged in the United States, American media usage peaked. In response, the British abandoned the term. It felt too American. That brings us to the modern era, where the stakes of this linguistic divide are higher than ever. With the 2026 World Cup arriving in North America, the sport takes center stage in a country strictly knowing it by its 19th century nickname. So when an American calls the beautiful game soccer, they aren't demonstrating cultural ignorance. They are perfectly preserving an authentic piece of British history, a word the UK specifically engineered, shipped overseas, and then abandoned out of spite. If you want to learn exactly why Americans use yards instead of meters on that gridiron, click the video on your screen right now, and make sure to hit subscribe for more historical deep dives.